This week's episode of Brains on Games is about a worker placement route building game. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald, and this episode we're going to talk about a game that was sent to me a while back from the people at Pandasaurus. It's a game that requires you to place some workers and to build some routes or networks, and it's a little game that came out a few years ago called Wayfinders. This is a game for between 2 and 4 players. You can play a game in about half an hour to 45 minutes, and it works with kids aged 10 and up. Let's take a look at Wayfinders. As you can see, Wayfinders is a game that's built with a modular board. You've got these 16 tiles. The only one that's common to every game is this one in the middle where you're sort of establishing the player order, and that's the starting position of the planes. But there are 3 different kinds of islands. What you're trying to do in this game is explore these islands around the board and build airstrips that are going to give you some victory points at the end, or some abilities during the game, or some resources that will help you with this game. We'll talk about how you do that. But first, there are 3 different kinds of islands that you might land on. And there are so many tiles in the box. I mean, there's almost twice as many tiles as you need to play a game. So you could almost play 2 completely different games with these tiles. There's not quite enough to do that, but it does give you a lot of variability. And that I like these modular boards that allow for some extra replayability because it's like a different puzzle every time you play the game. Some of these islands have effects. You've got like victory points here that you're going to get at the end of the game, but you might score some points for every island that has one of your airstrips on it of a particular color, or you might get some resources when you build an airstrip on an island, or you might be able to use some resource as like a wild resource, because these resources are very important in the game. Once you've got the board set up, like this one is, and the hangar is filled with resources, well, then you can begin playing the game. This right here on the first tile that you start with is really just the player order. So your first hangar is going to go on there just to show what order you're playing the game in, because when you hit the game ending condition, you finish out that round so that everyone has the same number of turns. You've got 2 choices on your turn. You can either place a worker on the hangar board here, or you can collect all of your workers from the hangar board. And if you collect your workers, there's some other things that can happen after that. Worker placement is just all about placing one of your 5 workers in one of these columns, and you can have up to 3 in a single column. And I think if I remember right, there can be a total of 5 workers, so the other player might have a couple of workers on the same column as mine. Let me add those on there as if we had done some turns. I've got this set up for a 2-player game. There are some additional columns if you're playing 3, and even more if you're playing 4. Let me add in a couple of extra workers here. So you might have your workers placed on the board like this, and then your other option is to collect the workers. When you collect, you can't only collect 1 or 2, you have to collect all of them. And when you do, you are also going to collect the resources in that column from the top to the bottom. So I had 1 worker here, so I'll get one of these little chips. And I've got 3 workers, so I'm going to take all 3 of these over here. Now the next thing that I can do, now that I have some resources stacked here in front of me, is I can move my plane. And you can move your plane north, south, east, or west. It's always orthogonal. You can't do diagonal movements. And if my plane were the orange one, because those are the workers that I've been gathering, let me see which way I might go. I might say I move my guy right down here. Now, what's going to happen is, in order for me to move my plane, I have to spend some resource that matches the color of the island. So in this case, I've got a purple island here, and that means I have to spend one of these purple headphones. They just go back in the bag. Let me show you. You've got a great big bag with all of the resources inside of it. So if I spend a resource like that, it goes back in the bag. I've still got 2 of these headphones, a gas can, and a parachute left. Now, what can I do once I get to an island? The idea of this game is that you're trying to build airstrips to earn some victory points or gain some resources along the way. and your airstrips are represented by these little hangers that you're going to put on the board. In order for me to build an airstrip on this space, I need one gas can, one propeller, and one parachute. Now I have a parachute. I have a parachute. I have a gas can. I don't have a propeller, but I can exchange 2 matching resources as a wild card. So I can spend these 2 little headphones in order to represent the little propeller, and that would allow me to be the first one to place my hanger on that board. These resources go back in the bag, but one of the interesting things, let me drop these in. One of the interesting things about this game is that now if the second player also wants to build an airstrip there, they can do that. You can see there's space for 4 different ones, but instead of spending the resources and putting them in the bag, they give the resources to the player who was the first to build the airstrip. So it does become interesting. Do you want to build an airstrip there and give the other player some of your resources instead of just dropping them in the bag? Now, once I've built this airstrip, the next thing that happens here is that this is a resource island, so I'm going to get a resource, and in this case, it's ×2. So I reach into the bag and I pull out just a couple of these resources, and now I've got a gas can and a propeller. So next time, I've got some resources already that I can use. You've got to, once you've moved your plane and you've built your airstrip, you then have to discard down to 3 resources. You're only allowed to hang on to 3. You can have as many as you want until you start to move your plane. The final part of the turn, now that I've collected my resources, I've collected my workers, I've got 5 workers now in front of me, is to refill the hangar. So these guys move up to the top, and then I just randomly add resources from the bag. So I'm reaching in here and just at random pulling out these. So you're flying around this board, you're often trying to be the first to play an airstrip, but sometimes there might be some benefit even to being second, whether it's I want those 2 resources or 3 resources in the case of that island down there at the bottom. I want you're still going to get the victory points at the end regardless of whether you're the first or the second or the third. There are some other reasons though that you might want to do it. Maybe it's because there's some special ability. For example, if I were to build one of my airstrips over here on this island, this little symbol means that now I can fly through the red islands for free. It doesn't cost me a resource to move on to a red island. So there are a whole bunch of red ones. I guess I didn't shuffle up the tiles very well. There's a whole bunch of red ones all up here. And if I had my airstrip, I could now fly through every single one of them without paying any resources. So suddenly as your hangers are starting to get placed out on the board, your plane earns some more abilities that they can use. Another thing that happened, and this was huge in the game that we played, is that we started to try and build airstrips onto these islands that have some scoring effects. This one down here at the bottom isn't going to give you just 3 victory points at the end. You're going to get 3 victory points for each island that surrounds this one. So for every hangar I have around here, I'm going to get 3 extra points, and it does start to add up. You might get some points for each hangar that you have on an island of a particular color. In this case, every time I manage to build my hangars in a square, I'm going to get 12 points. And in the last game that I played was the other night. My son came over with his girlfriend and we played this game. And this was huge. We were both trying to make as many squares as we could. Now, his girlfriend was trying a totally different approach, because not only are you scoring victory points for those islands, you also get points for the resources. And what she was trying to do was to sort of corner the market on the gas cans at first, and then she wanted to collect the yellow ones after that. So she had, by the time we were almost done the game, every gas can in this bag was in front of her. But because once you move your plane, you have to discard down to 3, that sort of trapped her in one spot. She would have to discard almost everything once she started to move her plane around. So She was trying to earn points based on the resources, but she wasn't building any airstrips. So at the end of the game, she came in last place. It was sort of maybe an edge case scenario, I guess, where she was just trying to make it more difficult for us. She wasn't necessarily trying to win. And it does get harder if you can't find a particular resource, because then you need two matching ones in order to replace the one that you couldn't get. So it was almost impossible to get a gas can from here. And it was like a race. Every time a gas can came out in the hangar, the next player was really trying to make sure that they were the first one on there so that they could grab it. And that's a pretty quick description of how to play Wayfinders. Now, it is very helpful that they included some of these little player aid cards to help you with the symbols, because some of these symbols you're not just going to remember the first time you play. This does make it a lot easier to teach new people the game. And my son and his girlfriend both, well, my son is a very experienced board game player. His girlfriend is less so. She enjoyed this one, but like I said, she was sort of doing some crazy stunt in order to collect the resources rather than really playing the game the way it was meant to be played. That didn't allow her to win, but she was able to learn the game very quickly and very easily. So like I said, there's two things you can do. You're either placing your workers or you're removing them. And once you remove them, you can spend your resources to move your plane or to place an airstrip somewhere on the board. This is clearly a very spatial game. You might be trying to surround your island with as many of your airstrips as possible. You might be trying to create those squares like I was. There are some tiles here on the board that give you extra points for airstrips in the same row or the same column. You might earn some extra points for airstrips on islands that have a resource cost of 3 or of 4. There are lots of ways to earn points in the game. You may be earning some powerful abilities like using the yellow resources as a wild card or being able to hold on to 1 extra resource instead of just the 3. It's a spatial game, but you're also doing those calculations of the points. So you're predicting, how far can my plane go? Do I have the resources to do the thing that I need to do once I get there? And then how am I going to use those actions to maximize the number of points? It seems like, intuitively, it seems like to maximize your actions, you're going to try and place all 5 of your workers on the board. So when you reclaim them, you're going to have 5 different resources, but that might not be the case because another player could beat you to the punch and take the resources that you wanted, like those gas cans like I was talking about, or they might be starting to build those airstrips, and then once you get out to try and build yours, you're going to be paying them instead of putting them in the bag. So it really does make an interesting kind of resource management, action management, and of course you're working all that out on the spatial side of this board where you're trying to predict how are you going to maximize the use of those resources. You've got those visual spatial planning and problem solving skills, and if you're planning ahead and budgeting, those are the executive functioning skills. And we've talked so much about executive functioning games on the show. One other thing that I'll mention is that one of the executive functions, of course, is the working memory skill, the ability to juggle information in your mind and do mental math. And there is a lot of mental math where you're calculating out, well, what's the benefit? Do I want to give my opponent some resources in order to make a square on the board? And that's certainly what happened. I was able to, when I played with my son, I was able to be the first one to reach this island and build the hangar there. He was second. He was willing to give me the resources because he figured that making those squares would be enough to benefit him sufficiently that even if he gave me some resources, he was still going to win out in the end. He came in second, though. His dad was the winner of that game that we played. What I like about this game is that combination of worker placement. You're sort of racing to collect the right things, and the modular board that creates a different puzzle every time that you play the game. There's so many tiles that the game can be different every time you lay out the board. And I think that push and pull of trying to race to get the right resources or be the one who builds your hangar first, I think that's an interesting dynamic. The game continues until one player is down to only 2 hangars left. You start the game with 10, I think 9 once you've placed this first one on the player order tile here. And so once you've only got 2 left, that's the final round, and then you just play until everybody's had the same number of turns. That's when you start to count up the points. The artwork on the tiles is great, and I like being able to fly around these little plastic planes. The one knock I guess I have against it is that it does become hard over time to keep track of your player powers based on where you've put your hangers, and then to do the scoring at the end. So it would have been nice to have had a pad in the box somewhere where you could check off, okay, what are my permanent abilities that I'm gaining? Where can I fly through for free? Things like that, getting the extra resource. Instead of discarding down to 3, you would discard down to 4. Those would be good reminders to have somewhere as you're playing the game, because if you're placing 6 or 7 of these things and you're trying to keep in your mind, like, what are the things I can do? Where can I go? That's a lot to juggle. And it does kind of bump up against the barriers of a typically functioning person's working memory skills. So that, I'd say, would be the only knock. I started, as we were counting up victory points, I'm pulling out the notes app on my phone, and my son says, no, Dad, wait a minute. Just use these poker chips. And so we counted everything up using our favorite poker chips. And it was him. He reminded me instead, I love these chips. And he was the one who reminded me to do that. So those chips don't come with the game, but we use them as scoring markers for almost every game we play. Thanks again to Pandasaurus for sending me a copy of Wayfinders. If you have any comments about this video or questions about the game or suggestions for the show, you can leave them in the comments section below this video, or you can email me at brian@brainsongames.ca. Brainsongames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go, and the previous ones are up there already. Brains on Games is the Twitter handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed, so we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.